Whether you're a brand new player or a veteran to the game, Satisfactory 1.0 can feel very overwhelming at first. Well, luckily I've got 15 tips and tricks that should be able to help you out to make your playthrough a bit smoother. This is the first of multiple tutorial videos I'll be releasing for Satisfactory, so if you're a fan of the game, then consider subscribing. I release videos like this almost every single day now, and of course your support is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's start with tip number 1, and that is collecting foliage. Now, I understand this sounds extremely basic. Of course, collect leaves, collect wood. There is a reason why I say this. The second that my pod lands in Satisfactory, the very first thing I do, of course, is scan for iron to make sure I'm next to a good node. However, the second thing I do is I collect a bunch of leaves and a bunch of wood. Preferably wood if I can, and I'll explain the reason for that in just a minute. I do this for multiple reasons, but the main one being the last position that you want to be in is when you finally unlocked yourself some smelters and some constructors, and then you realize, I haven't got enough leaves or wood or biomass to actually power anything in my factory. Because that's going to suck and of course slow down your production line quite a lot. So when you land in the pod and you have nothing, you can just collect a bunch of leaves, a bunch of wood, and of course explore the map a little bit, have a bit of fun. Eventually, when you do unlock the biomass burner, I recommend only burning your leaves until you unlock biomass. Then convert all of your wood into biomass and use that biomass to burn. And the reason as to why I say use your wood to convert into biomass and use your leaves just to leave them as leaves is because of this. Every 120 leaves that you consume per minute, you then get 60 biomass. Whereas for every 60 wood per minute that you consume, you get 300 biomass per minute. First of all, it saves you a bunch of time and of course power, and the second reason makes a bit more sense. Remember, early game, your conveyor belts can only handle 60 items per minute. So regarding leaves, you wouldn't even be able to get this. You'd have to half this down to 60 leaves per minute, which then gives you 30 biomass per minute, which is pretty terrible. And then when it comes to the wood, okay, 60 per minute, great. But then again, this is 300 biomass per minute. So in that case, you can only deal with, again, 60 per minute. So divide this by 5, you get 60. Divide this by 5, and you get 12. You can only do 12 wood per minute in the constructor. Whereas if you were to, again, handcraft the wood into biomass or even leaves into biomass, you can get through hundreds, let alone just 12. So again, handcraft saves you power, saves you time, and again, you get a lot of biomass for it in return. So make sure that when the pod drops, you collect foliage as quickly as possible and as much as possible if you can. But foliage isn't the only thing you should collect, and this leads us on to point number 2. Collect power slugs. At first, you won't really be able to do much of the power slugs early game because you haven't unlocked things in the MAM yet. But I still very, very, very highly recommend collecting the power slug for 2 reasons. 1, why not? If you're literally walking past it, you might as well collect it. The only issue with that though, is that there might be some hostile enemies, some aliens or mobs, whatever you like to call it, that might try and stop you from doing that. Just whip out your Xeno Zapper, give them a couple bashes, and it should be fine depending on what biome you're in, obviously. But I do recommend still doing that. Second reason, and this is definitely something I do quite a lot, which I definitely wish I didn't, but you might forget where that power slug actually was. Of course, later on in the game, you can unlock a power slug scanner, so you can just scan where the power slugs are, which of course is great. Again, we're talking about early game here, where you still haven't even placed down a single thing in your factory yet. But there's of course reasons how you might not be able to collect it. Like if a power slug is inside of a bunch of gas and you think you might die, don't collect it. If it's next to a bunch of radiation, you think you might die, don't collect it. And of course, if it's very high up and there's not a physical way to get to it, obviously, don't get it. If a power slug is easily able to be collected, like if it's in the middle of an open field, or if it's on top of like a slight hill that you can easily climb up, do collect them, because the time will come where you are thankful for that. Also, it's quite important to note that each 3 of these power slugs all give you a different amount of power shards, and again, with these power shards, you can overclock basically every single machine in the game, so power shards are very, very important. So, with the blue power slug, you get 1 power shard, with the yellow power slug, you get 1 power shard, and with the purple power slug, you get 5 power shards. And the reason for this is that with the blue slug, you often find in easier locations. The yellow slug, you often find it in more difficult situations, like either inside of gas, or at a high mountain, or in between some difficult mobs. And with the purple slug, which again gives you 5 power shards, 5 times better than this blue slug, this is found in the most difficult locations, whether it's extremely high up, like in the footage you're seeing in the background, or whether it's in between tons of gas, radioactive material, and whatnot. So this is a lot more difficult to collect than this. But yeah, the colors aren't just different for the sake of it, they all do represent something different and unique. Just thought I'd let you know. Third thing I recommend that you do before you even place down your first smelter or your first constructor is hunt for crash sites. You've probably heard a few people talk about this, but crash sites in Satisfactory is literally an untapped gold mine which so many people don't bother going for until late game, which by that stage they're almost kind of pointless, but early game, crash sites are amazing. Just have a look at the clips in the background. I've managed to find a few crash sites and look at the stuff I'm able to collect. Some of these items would take me 100 hours to try and actually make and automate in Satisfactory, like for example computers or things along that stage. But even the more basic things like reinforced iron plates, screws, wire, cable, these things are ultra important, especially again early game, because as you'll see in a second, like look at my inventory. This is just from 3 crash sites, which a lot of them are actually very close to each other. Just crafting those screws would take you ages, let alone the computers or the reinforced iron plates and the other stuff we'll be able to collect. And again, this is all free. And one of the best parts is, if you look at this clip right here, we actually got enough screws to unlock one of the sealed areas inside of one of the crash sites to get our very first hard drive. Again, haven't placed down a single thing yet, and we've already got this. So eventually, after collecting a bunch of foliage, the power slugs, and of course after being to the crash sites, your inventory might start to get full up, and I think it's about this time you should start to look for your ideal starting location. Of course, by this stage you would have already had the choice of spawning in 4 different biomes, so hopefully you're in the correct biome that you want to be in. But I recommend choosing somewhere that is near a lot of iron, a good amount of copper, and a good amount of limestone. You don't necessarily need things like raw quartz, caterium, SAM. Don't necessarily worry about it just yet. But as long as you have those 3 starting resources, again, iron, copper, and limestone, then that's a pretty good place to be. So plop down your hub, try to unlock the first couple of stages if you can, and try to get the storage containers, because again, you're going to be collecting a lot of resources as the game goes on. Oh, and most importantly, try and make a good amount of miners as well, because especially if it's a resource that's a bit further away, like maybe, for example, copper might be a bit far away, just place down 5 miners, then you only have to go back and forth like once every hour, whereas you have to go back, once every 10 minutes if you didn't do that. So yeah, miners are quite important. Remember, place down a lot of miners. So finding a good starter location, of course, is rather important. Something else that would be equally important in 1.0 is Somersloop and Mercer Spheres. Just like I was saying with the power slugs, if you manage to find any of these Somersloops or Mercer Spheres in your game, collect them instantly. But again, they might be like really high up or in some sort of like gas bubble which you might not necessarily want to get to, or it might be trapped in something which you have to explode to try and get. But if it's in a relatively easy position to try and harvest it. Because why not? And the reason why I've made this at separate points is because, of course, in 1.0, these 2 items are going to be massively important. I think Mercer Sphere is more important like late game, maybe mid-late game. But Somersloop could be rather cool, especially early game as well, trying to boost your factories even further. The only main issue I can think of with using Somersloop early game is that it consumes so much more power inside of your constructors and smelters that I would almost recommend not using it early game. But again, I'll have separate tutorials on my channel for Mercer Spheres and Somersloops when we get a bit more information about it, because they're very interesting. So stay tuned for that. This next tip is mostly for new players. I would hope veteran players wouldn't do this, but it's do not, under any circumstances, collect uranium. Do not harvest uranium, do not mine uranium, do not go near uranium if you can. Sometimes you might have to, but try to avoid it if you can. Because the first time I played Satisfactory and uranium was in the game, I collected it, and I died of radiation poisoning. Again. And again. And again, and again, and again, until eventually I realized, yeah, I've essentially lost everything I was carrying because I couldn't get rid of the uranium fast enough. So don't mind uranium, please. One thing you should mine, and our next point we'll be discussing, is rare resources, especially things like SAM, Caterium, raw quartz, and coal. Essentially everything but uranium. There is a reason for that, because you can research all this stuff in the MAM. Unfortunately, for some of it, you will need plastic and rubber for some things, which of course you won't get until mid-game. But for other items, you can get it early game. And when you have a decent power system sorted out, you can then convert, let's say, the Caterium into Caterium ingots, then convert the Caterium ingots into quick wire, then use the quick wire to sync into your awesome sync to get tickets, then use the tickets to get architecture and new equipment, and yeah, it's a whole thing. It's pretty good. Very quickly, I would like to talk about the 8th tip, which is don't overbuild. Preferably until you've locked core power, which I'll talk a bit about later on. Don't try and build an absolutely massive factory when you've still got biomass production. This is for two reasons. One, it's a waste of power, and secondly, you're probably not going to need everything. As long as you have a basic iron plate, iron rod, copper wire, and probably even a concrete production. And of course, you might also have to make some screws and some reinforced iron plates and rotors, but except for that, you don't really need to make anything else until you have got coal all nailed down, because again, you don't want to be relying on biomass, and of course, if you overbuild, you're going to spend ages doing it, it's a waste of time, and of course, it's completely unnecessary. So only do small builds like this, don't do anything stupid. Oh, I've built something stupid. 9th point to raise is don't go overboard with the overclocking. But what exactly is overclocking? Well, you have to come here into your MAM. Then there should be a category here called power slugs. Luckily, I've already fully researched it, but you might not have. And for this, you are going to have to research blue power slugs, and then this overclocking production right here. Overclocking is used in every single production building, from small to big. The way it works is that you put in your power shards into the machines like so, and then the clock speed can go from 100%, which is normal, all the way up to 250%. So let's say I would like to make some alternate turbo fuel with the electric motor recipe. I can still put in our 3 power shards just like that, boosted up, and we are consuming a lot more resources, but we are making a lot more turbo motors as well. And the reason for this is because crafting the item becomes a lot quicker. Overclocking is extremely awesome in Satisfactory, but I see a lot of people using it wrong. What they end up doing is overclocking machines that they don't really need to overclock, which then obviously consumes a lot more power. So choose your overclocking carefully. However, the one thing I would recommend you always overclock is the miners. To understand the reason for that, we move on to our next point, efficiency. So, with this miner right here, it's currently placed on a pure node, but it's only a Mark 1 miner, unfortunately. Despite that, we are still getting 120 parts per minute, which is great. And remember, this is just an early game tutorial. Of course, late game you can get a lot more than just this. Now, we can't talk about efficiency without talking about conveyor belts. This is the standard Mark 1 conveyor belt that you get at tier 0, I believe it is, in the hub. And this is the Mark 2. Of course, in the game it now goes up to Mark 6, but again, this is just an early game tutorial, so these are most likely the only 2 conveyor belts you would have had. And again, we are dealing with 120 parts per minute here. So the conveyor belt Mark II actually deals with this thing perfectly. If we want to try and produce concrete from this miner, we have to place down a constructor, because as we can see, you can make concrete just like that. The next part to pay attention to is what it says up here. Items per minute being consumed, and of course, items per minute being produced. You can see for every 3 limestone, you create 1 concrete. But what we want to pay attention to is this number right here. 45 per minute. And again, we are producing 120 limestone per minute. So if we were to only place down 1 constructor here, this would not be efficient whatsoever. We would have an absolute ton of limestone left over. In case you'd like to do the maths, press the N button on your keyboard, N for November, and type 120 minus 45. And there you go, the game does the calculations for you immediately. And of course, you can do a divide in there with the slash. You can do a plus in there as well. And if you'd like to do a times in the calculator, you can just do the asterisk right there. And there you go, it times it. But again, the one that we're looking for here is the minus. So we still have 75 resources left over, which means that we can place down 2 more of these things. Okay, brilliant. Now we have got 3 of these things placed down. But if we actually add up the amount of items that we're now consuming, it comes up to 135. Again, if you want, you can always just use the calculator for this. 45 times by 3. 135 items per minute. But, again, we're only making 120. So now we're off by 15. If only there was a way we can actually get into these machines to turn down the amount of items we actually need. Luckily, this is Satisfactory. There is a solution to everything. Currently require 15 limestone to many, and there's 3 machines. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So if there was a way we can get this down to 40, we would then have a 100% efficient miner to constructor to concrete recipe. So let's try and do that. And this is where things start to get a little bit fidgety, as they say. So 14 concrete per minute requires 42 limestone. However, 13 concrete per minute requires 39, so you're just under by 1. So in theory, this works completely fine. Luckily, we're only dealing with 3 constructors here, but let's say you had 30 constructors that all needed this change. You'd have to jump onto each and every one of them, mess around with the settings just like this. But luckily, there is a copy and paste setting in the game. So let's say I randomly select silica, and then I do something like this. All I would have to do is go back to the constructor where all the parts are exactly what I need it to be. Press Ctrl, then C, and it should say settings copied. You then go back over to this constructor, which again still has the silica, wrong settings, everything. Let's just turn this down to a 10 clock speed. You know, settings that you don't really want. You then press Ctrl V, and then suddenly it's the exact same settings as the constructor that you copied it from. But of course, it's not just the constructor, and it's not just the assemblers either. In fact, you can do this with every single production building in the game, plus some other stuff. Let's assume that you've built something using lights and Satisfactory, and you're overall pretty happy with the bit. Oh, what's that? One of your signs has messed up, which isn't very good because it doesn't really fit the local aesthetics. So what you need to do, again, press Ctrl C on the billboard. Come back down over here, select the billboard that you want to change, Ctrl V, and there you go. It's now nice and perfect just for you. The next setting I would like to talk about is nudge. Let's say, for example, you really want to place down this assembler hanging over this foundation. I don't know why you want to do this, but let's just use it as an example. It says floor too steep. No matter how many times you spam it, even if you rotate it, you can't place it down. Except, you can. All you have to do is press the H button on your controller. Then, you can place it down. This is called nudge, and if you're not overusing this thing, please do. Because the nudge feature is one of my favorite features in the whole of Satisfactory. Obviously, it's not just used to place down items over the edge, but of course, nudge also has other features as well. When you press that H button, you actually lock the hologram into place. And you can move around, you can see, okay, I want to move it a little bit here to the left. That's perfect. Maybe a little bit further to the back. There we go, awesome. So you can nudge it into the exact position you want. Hence why it's called nudge. I pressed the wrong button. You can move it to the left, you can move it to the right, you can move it forwards, and of course backwards. And if you want, you can move it diagonally and all. However, do be cautious though, you can't move it too far. Eventually it will say nudge exceeds max distance. I believe it's about 1 foundation on each side, so you can still move it like a fair bit, but don't expect to nudge this halfway across your planet, because you will be disappointed. However, I love this feature so freaking much. The next tip I'd like to give is get the F away from biomass as quickly as possible. Odds are, when you're watching this video, the biomass burners is now going to have a conveyor belt entrance. So you can put in the leaves, the wood, the biofuel, or of course, these solid biofuel products, which is fantastic. Except, it's not as good as this. This is the coal generator, and you do unlock this a little bit later on in the game, but the reason as to why I've given so many of my tips to save you power is that you don't spend hours and hours and hours collecting biomass. Last thing you want to do, again, is spend so long collecting biomass that you don't really focus too much on your factory. Because by the time you've built a few constructors and you've created a few iron plates, you then have to go collect more biomass and more. So try and keep your factory as small as possible, preferably even just do half, like handcrafting for a good amount of time as well, until you get coal power plants. Because with the coal generators and the coal power plants, you don't really have to do any sort of like fiddling with it. The water goes in, the coal goes in, that's it. You don't have to collect leaves, you don't have to collect wood, you don't have to feed it into this thing, unless of course you're already feeding it in using a conveyor belt. All you have to do is just add the coal and water into this thing. So I do recommend, again, keeping your factory small, just so you can try and unlock coal power as quickly as possible. This next point, I actually think is one of the most important ones, other than the last point, which I'm about to mention soon. And that is, go at your own pace. You might eventually watch tutorials that I'll be making, and let's plays, and all sorts from a bunch of different amazing content creators that play Satisfactory. And you might be thinking, damn, they're very good at the game. Not this Valhalla and Pickle guy, but everyone else. I want to build a mega factory. I want to build this factory. I want to unlock this and unlock that. Am I going quick enough? Am I too slow? Should I be at this stage after playing for this many hours? Don't think like that. Especially, again, if you are a new player. Go at your own pace. Enjoy the game. Explore things yourself. And again, a hot take, especially from someone who makes tutorials, don't watch too many tutorial videos. Because the way I first played the game for the first few hundred hours is I never watched a single Satisfactory video. I played the game. If I made a mistake, I would learn from it. If I did something great, I would remember it. And that's the way that a game should really be. Yeah, you can watch 1,000 tutorial videos, but if you're not enjoying the game, if you're not going at your own pace, then you won't end up enjoying it. You might have a very efficient factory, it might look beautiful, but if you don't enjoy it, what's the point in playing it? And also, there will be points which every single player would experience. Whether it's your first hour in the game, or your 1000th hour in the game, you will feel overwhelmed from either logistics, or from doing maths, or from doing calculations, or planning. You will get overwhelmed. Don't be afraid to take a break. We all do it, and it's perfectly normal. So go at your own pace. Do not worry if you are slower at the game than a YouTuber, or your friend, or your sister. It really doesn't matter. Go at your own pace. And the final point that I would like to mention, and the most important point, is have fun. This is a game. This is not real life. And the devs wouldn't necessarily appreciate it if you were playing this game and stressing out about it. The whole point of why they've made the game is for you to enjoy it, and for you to relax after a hard day at work or a hard day at school. Just to come home, relax, and enjoy it. Have a bit of fun. Don't get burnt out. Enjoy the experience. And of course, if you do need help with anything, there's tons of tutorials, helps, tips and tricks and all sorts on their Discord, on my channel, and of course, tons of other Twitch and YouTube channels as well. And I'm sure Facebook, if you watch Facebook live streams. But of course, a massive thank you to Lo, Chaos Rising, Jan Matejko, and Meow Meow for all becoming members on the channel. If you too would like to become a member, you get access to exclusive badges, emotes, rewards, channel benefits, and a lot more. Click the membership link in the description below to join for £2.99 per month. It is the best way to support my work here on the channel. And that will just about do it for today's video, so click there or here to see more of my content, and subscribe if Satisfactory is the game for you. Have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, Godspeed.